Ladies and gentlemen, well, I hope you won't all disappear. I'm now seeing so many of you leave. This is actually why you're here, ladies and gentlemen. It's to talk about the 3 things that you need to do to really make a difference. I'm representing the Club of Rome, an organization that has been around for the last 50 years. And I'm going to give you a little secret, which is that I'm 53. So basically, that's my lifetime. And the reason I'm here today is to speak to you about what the Club of Rome believes is absolutely fundamental. That since the beginning, when actually it talked about the limits to growth in 1972, that the importance of the human being and its link to the planet must be taken into consideration in terms of the planetary boundaries. This was already declared in the limits to growth. When you look at the business as usual capacity, which was already predicted in 1968 when we started the Club of Rome, and then through this report in 1972, it was obvious that if we continued on a business as usual pathway, which at that time was actually only 4 billion people and now we're moving into 10, that we would actually start to have massive collapse of the planetary boundaries. And as you can see, since 1968, we have had a series of different reports, and these are only some of our legacy. And yet, for some reason, we now find ourselves with catastrophic impacts, which are coming across in every single country across the globe. The reason, ladies and gentlemen, is that we are in a process of systems fragility, a planet that has been infected by Homo sapiens. As you can see already last year, we had a series of different reports. All of you know those reports, the first which started with global warming predictions of 1.5 degrees being very difficult, of the fact that we were seeing a series of extinction predictions with regard to most of our ecosystems and our biodiversity, that we were seeing 40% of pollinators that were already extinct. And the fact is that while we were receiving these messages from across the globe, and as we were seeing paradise burning in California, or Australia burning here, or a series of hurricanes, people continue to take selfies. They continue to be more obsessed about themselves than understanding that their relationship with the planet that they're living on is fundamental, because that is their home. This is a dire issue. It has a series not only of humanitarian impacts, but clearly economic and financial costs. If you look at the fact that global disasters in 2017 cost already $306 billion, and that actually in 2018 and 2019 were doubled once again in terms of their cost. If you look at the fact that not only did we see the displacement of mass people due to floods, hurricanes, and other impacts, but we also saw a series of deaths, only 1,200 of deaths and displacement in Southeast Asia, but many others in other areas. So the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that our system's fragility is affecting every part of our system, our social system, even our law and order. Because the fact of the matter is that if we're going to look at a way in which we can collectively work together in order to shift the demise of some of our systems and the demise of the way in which we work within this planet, we must actually have a law and legal system that functions. And what we're seeing is that this concept of law and order is being destroyed through Twitter diplomacy and a series of other ways in which leaders are forgetting that they should be leading, not only in the area of climate change or in the area of biodiversity, but also in terms of social equity. And this is very difficult when we were faced with the challenges that we have today. So the questions that we're asking ourselves at the Club of Rome and amongst a variety of different thought leaders across the globe is how do we deal with this system's fragility when on the one hand we are losing law and order, when on the one hand we have leaders like Bolsonaro, like Trump and others who believe that actually it is their own preservation of their own economies that is the most important and not necessarily the impact on the rest of the globe. How do we do that and juxtapose that with people that are taking to the streets? And then in addition to that, how do we also take into consideration that when people take to the streets, we have the youth on one hand who are saying, we are close to the end of the world, and therefore we are holding you leaders accountable. And others, like the Gilets jaunes, who are saying, we cannot meet the end of the month. And hence we cannot see costs go up. And yet we all know that if we're going to price externalities properly, we therefore need to think about how we bring up our costs on some of fossil energy use, embedded carbon in products, etc. So if we start to look at what we need to do and what are the 3 key areas that we need to focus on in order to do that, in order to ensure that we actually meet our warming projections head on, and so we actually get to 2 degrees, because we know that current policies, as you can see, are actually not going to get us to 2 degrees, but 3.1, and definitely not going to get us to 1.5. The only way to do that, and this is one of the plans that actually the Club of Rome published last year in response to all of the discussions around climate, was to put in place an emergency plan. We now have a series of declarations across the globe, and what we're saying to leaders is it's one thing to clearly state that you are understanding that there is an emergency. It's another to put a plan of action in place. And that we know that there is the possibility for a great transformation if we put in place the right actions. And that that transformation can lead us to emerge from emergency. Because the fact of the matter, in working with Johan Rockström, who for some is the science rock star in the area of climate change, we know that we have to put in place a global carbon law that is going to have emissions every decade. And to do that, we need to meet energy systems head-on, material systems head-on, and the human dimension head-on. Those are the 3 key areas that we're going to think about. And those 3 key areas where we can really make a difference were put forward at the Climate Week in New York with heads of state saying very clearly that what we need to do now is secure a new deal for people, nature, and climate. To do that, we have to look at our global commons. The fact of the matter, ladies and gentlemen, is that unfortunately we cannot reverse a melting iceberg. We've heard about, in this conference, the amount of technology that there is in order to get us out of this mess. But the fact is, once an iceberg melts, no technology is going to stop it from melting. Therefore, we have to take into consideration over the next decade what we will do with our global commons. And we need to put in place a series of urgent actions to do so. And this is where we come to the 3 key areas that we need to focus on. One is transform energy systems. We heard just last month that the European Investment Bank will now pull out of any new fossil energy infrastructure. We are calling at the Club of Rome to do just that. We're not saying that we won't continue to use fossil energy. We are saying that we need to stop stranded assets now in terms of new infrastructure. We need to continue doubling the investments in wind, solar capacity every 4 years, and also triple investments, in particular in emerging markets, in renewables. And we need to set a global price on carbon. So the first key action area is let's focus on energy systems. The next key action area is let's shift to a circular economy. Let's look at the way in which we look at materials. Let's agree in 2020 to have our consumption, coming back to the limits to growth. And the key message that we made, which is we have to, as human beings, reduce our consumption patterns, internalize externalities, and also ensure that we develop clear cross-sectoral roadmaps for all countries, including on land use as well as regenerative economies. And then the third key area, ladies and gentlemen, is that if we don't make an effort as we're looking at shifting our energy sources, as we're looking at creating a new circular economy, if we don't make an effort to bring people on board, all of this will collapse. Look back to the Gilets jaunes. Look back to the fact that we need a just transition. That just transition needs to foster and support local farmers, foresters, and indigenous people, and also ensure that we bring in place just transition funds. So I'm going to finish in just a minute. I see that the panel is now coming on board. This is a decade of action. And just by pulling out of fossil fuel energy and also eliminating fossil subsidies, you can see the impact that that will have. My last message to you is the following. Can we create a world in balance? And I would say yes. Emergency plans must be made across all jurisdictions. Action now for resilience later. Transformational, not incremental. Collaborative, not individual. Business unusual, not usual. More strategic and targeted action. Risk-taking is an absolute. A just transition is fundamental. Circularity versus linearity. Pragmatic yet radical. And pricing what matters. And I'll leave this with you. For those 3 actions that I've given you, you must be the leader that you want to see. Our moonshot is not going to the moon. It's saving the planet that we have. Thank you very much.